viewed from the Earth. But that's one of the minor mathematical details that they come up with. Now, a few months ago, I watched this BBC documentary for an hour called "Do We Really Need the Moon?" And it was fronted up by this lady who's a mainstream scientist who says she'd been obsessed with the moon since she was a kid. Well, not obsessed enough to look beyond the mainstream version of everything. And what she points out, quite bloody rightly, is that if the moon was not almost exactly where it is, life on Earth would be fundamentally different to where it is now. And I'm going, yeah, that it is now perfectly placed to sustain life is pure luck, a cosmic coincidence. I suggest not. This is one of the things that these authors say in their book. They're very, very detailed investigation into this. The moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. And so what I said, obviously when this came up, is, well, what does mainstream science say about where the moon came from? And it turns out to be a theory which is now considered fact by repetition. And the first one they came up with was the WAC theory. This is that a Mars-type planet, when the Earth was forming, smacked into it and a chunk of the Earth went off and became the moon. When that didn't pan out for them, they came up with the double WAC theory. This is where the Mars-type planet smacked the Earth, went away, came back and gave it another smack. And then it broke off and became the moon. I mean, it's like, you know, so I said in my latest book, you know, you look at so much scientific fact. It's like I'm going to put this duvet in this box. It's far too big for the box, so I'm going to sit on it to push it in, and then I'm going to get a very large person to sit on it and push it in. And even though things are still overlapping over the sides, I'm going to convince myself that all the duvet is in the box and everything fits. That's what scientific theory is like. It's okay, I know that don't work out, but forget about it. That's the theory, that's what happened, right? And this is a guy called Isaac Asimov, a Russian professor of biology that looked at the moon in quite great detail. And he said, we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept. Small planets, such as Earth, with weak gravitational fields, might well lack satellites. In general, then, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. Therefore, even if the Earth has a satellite, there would be every reason to suspect that at best it would be a tiny world, perhaps 30 miles in diameter. But that is not so. Earth not only has a satellite, but it is a giant satellite, 2,160 miles in diameter, bigger than Pluto. How is it then that tiny Earth has one? Amazing. The best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist, this scientist said. It seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence, says another NASA scientist. And then there's the evidence that the moon is hollow. In November 1969, NASA, they set up seismometers and stuff on the moon to see what happened when they smacked the lunar surface with something equivalent of 1 ton of TNT. And NASA said the shock waves built up and the moon rang like a bell. Morris Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, told a news conference, as for the meaning of it, I'd rather not make an interpretation right now. But it is though someone had struck a bell, say in the belfry of a church, a single blow, and found that the reverberation from it continued for 30 minutes. Dr. Frank Press from the MIT in America said that for a rather small impact to produce an effect that lasted for 30 minutes was quite beyond the range of our experience. NASA scientist Gordon MacDonald said in the early 1960s it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. Sean Solomon from MIT said the lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated the frightening possibility that, why he said frightening, I don't know, the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. And then, later, they gave the moon another smack. They love smacking the moon, don't they? And it was the equivalent of 11 tons of TNT this time, 11 times stronger. And NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 20 minutes to a depth of up to 25 miles. Ken Johnson, the supervisor at the Data and Photo Control Department during the Apollo missions, told Who Built the Moon author Alan Buckler that the moon not only rang like a bell, but the whole moon wobbled in such a precise way that it was almost as though it had gigantic hydraulic damper struts inside it. And as Carl Sagan, the great American cosmologist, said, a natural satellite cannot be a hollow object. Then I didn't realize this till this whole sequence started, is that in 1970, 2 members of the Soviet Academy of Sciences wrote a detailed article in something called Sputnik magazine, saying that the moon was a gigantic spacecraft. But before I go any further, it's important to get this across. Talk about opening your minds and stuff. It's important to get this idea across. We, as humans, are not at the cutting edge of technological possibility. We are knocking rocks together. And because when we are back from the line of understanding how reality works, its illusory nature, and how you can manipulate it from a vibrational level to become the holographic level, we are in a tiny box of technological possibility. When you cross that line, you can move thousands of years, symbolically, technologically, in a very, very short time. And because we're back this side of it, we are in the Stone Age still, technologically. I know there's apparently fantastic things going on. From my perspective, they are. They're still knocking rocks together. Can you imagine someone was in the Stone Age and literally knocking rocks together, and someone came up and said, you see that big ball in the sky? What do you call it, the moon? Yeah. You can fly to that. Bloody mad. Been on the mammoth juice. And yet this is the chasm of possibility and potential that we need to breach to understand what's actually bloody happening. And the other thing we need to do is redefine what we think is big. I've been saying that for years. Redefine what we think is big, because what is big to us is not big. It's all about perspective. I mean, there is no such thing as size, really. A pinhead and infinity are the same bloody thing. So, you know, I've talked to insiders who told me about seeing photographs of spacecraft, not least around Saturn on one occasion, that was so freaking vast, if you played down what their size must have been, it was beyond the imagination that anything could be built that big. We've really got to move. If we look at what I'm saying here from the perspective of human scientific potential, well, we might as well just go and have a cup of coffee, because it's going nowhere, because that's not the level we're talking about here, or these people were talking about. So what they said in this article is the outer surface of the moon is extremely hard and contains minerals like titanium, vast amounts of titanium. Moon rocks have been found to contain processed metals, including brass and mica, and the elements uranium-236 and neptunium-237 that have never been found to occur naturally. Uranium-236 is a long-lived radioactive nuclear waste and is found in spent nuclear fuel and reprocessed uranium. Neptunium-237 is a radioactive metallic element and a byproduct of nuclear reactions and the production of plutonium. Some lunar rocks have been found to contain 10 times more titanium than titanium-rich rocks on Earth. I thought the moon came from the Earth. The titanium is used in supersonic jets, deep-diving submarines, and spacecraft. Dr. Harold Urey, a winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, said he was terribly puzzled by the rocks from the moon, in particular their titanium content. He said the samples were mind-blowers and that he could not account for the titanium. This is what the 2 Soviet scientists said about the moon. If a material had to be devised to protect a giant artificial satellite from the unfavorable effects of temperature, from cosmic radiation and meteorite bombardment, the experts would probably have hit upon precisely these what are called refractory metals. In that case, is it not clear why lunar rock is such an extraordinarily poor heat conductor? Wasn't that what the designers of this super Sputnik of the Earth were after? From the engineer's point of view, the spaceship of ages long past, which we call the moon, is superbly constructed. If you're going to launch an artificial Sputnik, then it is advisable to make it hollow. At the same time, it would be naive to imagine that anyone capable of such a tremendous space project would be satisfied simply with some kind of giant empty trunk hurled into near-Earth trajectory. It is far more likely that what we have here is a very ancient spaceship, the interior of which was filled with fuel for the engines, materials and appliances for repair work, navigation instruments, observational equipment, and all manner of machinery. In other words, everything necessary to enable this caravel of the universe to serve as a Noah's Ark of intelligence, perhaps even as the home of a whole civilization, envisaging a prolonged thousands of millions of years existence and long wanderings through space, thousands of millions of miles. Naturally, the hull of such a spacecraft must be super tough in order to stand up to the blows of meteorites and sharp fluctuations between extreme heat and extreme cold. Probably the shell is a double-layered affair, the basis a dark armouring of about 20 miles in thickness, and outside of it some kind of more loosely packed covering, a thinner layer averaging about 3 miles. In certain areas where the lunar seas are and craters are, the upper layer is quite thin, in some cases non-existent. Well, what is absolutely true is this universal depth of the craters that go down like 2 or 3 miles or so. No matter how wide the bang was, the impact goes down a very, very universal depth. And if what they're saying is correct about this outer covering and then they hit that 20 miles impenetrable barrier, that would explain why it goes down, no matter how big the bang, so far and then stops. And Dr. D.L. Anderson, Professor of Geophysics and the Director of Seismological Laboratory at California Institute of Technology, said the moon is made inside out. In fact, what's on the surface should be inside. And what these two scientists were saying is they thought that it was some kind of hollowed out planetoid that had been turned into this craft by some extraordinarily advanced level of technological know-how. Now, when I came across this, I rang Quayle Mutwa, didn't tell him what I was doing, because I don't lead people on. I want to see what they say without that. And I just said to him, can you tell me any Zulu African legends about the moon? And he said, well, yeah, we say the moon's an egg. And so they're primitive people. They think the moon's an egg. That's what so many, mainstream anthropologists would say. But of course, he's not talking literally. He's talking symbolic. They say the moon has been hollowed out, and therefore they symbolize it as a hollowed out egg. And this is what he said about the African legends. The legends say that the moon was brought here hundreds of generations ago by 2 brothers, Wawani and Umpanku, who were the leaders of the Chitahuri. They were known as the Water Brothers and had scaly skin like a fish. Okay, so we go from southern Africa into what is now Iraq, and the Sumerian tablets from thousands of years BC, who talked about the Anunnaki being led by 2 brothers, Enki and Enlil, and certainly Enki is very much symbolized in relation to water. Zulu legends tell of how Wawani and Mpanku stole the moon in the form of an egg from the great fire dragon and emptied out the yolk until it was hollow. They then rolled the moon across the sky to the earth and caused great cataclysmic events on this planet.